This story is purely fictional. 5 years. That's how long I kept his secrets. 5 years of knowing where the bodies were buried, sometimes literally. And when his world finally turned on me, when they called me his whore in front of New York's elite, Antonio Salvatore stood 10 feet away and said nothing. That was the night I learned that loving a mafia boss means accepting that you'll always be expendable. Or so I thought. The scent of Italian leather and aged whiskey had become Elena Romano's atmosphere. For 5 years, she'd breathed it in daily within the mahogany-paneled office on the 52nd floor of Salvatore Tower, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked New York City like a kingdom waiting to be conquered. Behind the heavy oak door, his silhouette moved with predatory grace. Antonio Salvatore, the man the Italian families called Il Giudice, the judge, because his verdicts were final and his executions swift. At 38, he controlled the East Coast's most powerful crime family with an iron fist wrapped in Armani. Elena had spent 60 months, 1,825 days, arranging meetings that appeared in no calendar, memorizing the faces of men who smiled in public and killed in private, guarding secrets that could topple political careers and end bloodlines. The Salvatore family's legitimate real estate empire was merely the beautiful mask worn by something far darker. And Elena knew every shadow, every sin, every skeleton dancing in closets lined with blood money. But she stayed silent. That was her job. Antonio Salvatore's executive assistant. Invisible, indispensable, irreplaceable, or so he'd told her once, in a rare moment when his granite facade cracked just enough to let words slip through. The door opened without warning. Elena didn't look up from her computer until his voice cut through the silence like a blade through silk. "Tonight, you're coming with me to the Giordano wedding." Her fingers froze over the keyboard. 5 years. In 5 years, Antonio had never, not once, asked her to appear as anything other than the professional shadow at his back. "I don't think that's appropriate, Mr. Salvatore. I'm not family and the Giordanos." "That wasn't a question, Elena." His voice remained calm, but she heard the steel underneath, the tone that made men twice his size bow their heads. She had learned to read Antonio Salvatore the way ancient priests read entrails. The slight tightening of his jaw meant someone had just signed their death warrant. The way his fingers drummed once, just once, on his desk meant millions of dollars were about to change hands. The particular silence before he spoke meant someone's world was about to end. 5 years of studying a man who revealed nothing had made her fluent in the language of controlled violence. "Yes, Mr. Salvatore," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. He turned then, and for the first time that morning he actually looked at her. Really looked. His dark eyes, almost black in certain light, like polished obsidian, held hers for 3 seconds. In Antonio Salvatore's world, 3 seconds of direct eye contact was an eternity. "Wear your hair down tonight, Elena. You always wear it up." Her breath caught. 5 years of sleek, professional buns. 5 years of severe elegance. And he'd noticed. "Yes, Mr. Salvatore." She moved toward the door, but his voice stopped her at the threshold. "Elena." She turned back. Antonio stood backlit by the New York skyline, his tall frame cutting a silhouette that belonged in Renaissance paintings of dark angels. "Tonight will be different. Stay close to me." It sounded like protection. It sounded like a warning. With Antonio Salvatore it was always both. Elena didn't know that tonight would shatter everything she thought she knew about loyalty, love, and the man who held her heart in hands stained with blood. That afternoon blurred past in a whirlwind of preparation that felt surreal. Elena stood in Valentino's private showroom, a place she'd never dared enter before, where a single dress cost more than her monthly rent. The saleswoman recognized the Salvatore name immediately. Suddenly Elena mattered. Suddenly she belonged. She chose a deep emerald dress that matched her eyes, elegant but restrained, with a neckline that stayed professional while acknowledging she was, in fact, a woman. When she faced the mirror, she barely recognized herself. 5 years ago, on her first day, she'd worn a gray blazer and practical pumps. Antonio had looked at her exactly once and said, "You'll do." She'd spent the next month wondering what exactly she would do, and what she'd gotten herself into. The job posting had been deliberately vague: executive assistant to high-profile businessman. Absolute discretion required. Competitive compensation. She'd needed money. Her younger brother Marco was starting college, and their parents, Italian immigrants who'd worked themselves to death running a small restaurant in Brooklyn, were gone. Elena had told herself it would be temporary, just until she found something better. 5 years later she was still there. She'd stopped looking for something better because nothing else could ever be this. Elena sank into the fitting room chair, the emerald dress draped across her lap, and let herself remember. She'd been 17 when her father died of a heart attack behind the counter of Romano's trattoria, collapsing between the pasta machine and the ancient espresso maker that had belonged to his father. 20 when her mother followed him, cancer eating through her body faster than the chemotherapy could fight it. At 21, Elena became everything to 15-year-old Marco: mother, father, provider, protector. She worked 3 jobs: waitressing during lunch, bartending at night, and doing freelance translation work in whatever hours remained. Italian-English, English-Italian, the language of her parents' homeland becoming her survival tool. The medical debt from her mother's treatment sat on Elena's shoulders like a cross she'd carry forever. $200,000. An impossible mountain for a girl from Brooklyn with a high school diploma and calloused hands. When she'd seen Antonio Salvatore's job posting offering a salary 5 times what she earned working herself to exhaustion, she hadn't asked questions. She couldn't afford to. Now, sitting in this boutique where everything cost a fortune, Elena stared at her reflection and wondered how far she'd come from the girl who'd worn her mother's old coat through 3 New York winters because she couldn't afford a new one. She'd paid off the medical debt. Marco was in his final year at NYU studying computer science, with no idea how his tuition was really covered. He didn't know what Elena did, didn't know who she worked for, and she wanted to keep it that way. The woman in the mirror had olive skin from her Italian heritage, dark eyes that had seen too much, and black hair that fell in waves past her shoulders when she finally let it down. Tonight would be different, Antonio had said. And for the first time in 5 years, Elena let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't merely an invisible tool to him. By 7:30 that evening, Elena arrived at Salvatore Tower. She'd spent hours getting ready, applying makeup with the same precision she used to organize Antonio's impossible schedule. Her hair fell loose over her shoulders, styled in soft waves instead of the severe bun that had become her signature. Luca, Antonio's driver and bodyguard, saw her first. He actually stopped mid-stride, his scarred face registering shock. "Madonna Santa," he muttered in Italian. "The boss will." "Will what?" Antonio's voice cut through the lobby like a whip crack. He stepped out of the private elevator, adjusting his cufflinks, and then he saw her. Elena watched something she'd never witnessed before. Antonio Salvatore stopped moving. Just for a heartbeat. Just for a single moment when the most controlled man in New York actually hesitated. His obsidian eyes met her dark green ones, and something shifted in his expression. Something that looked almost like hunger before his iron control slammed back into place. "You're ready?" he said. Not a question. A statement. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Antonio moved to her side, and what happened next made her heart forget how to beat. He offered his arm, a gesture straight from old-world Italian courtesy, the kind of thing his grandfather probably did for his grandmother in Sicily. Elena placed her hand on his arm, feeling expensive fabric and hard muscle beneath her fingers, feeling warmth radiating from his body. They'd been close before, in elevators, in the backseat of the car during tense drives to even tenser meetings, in his office late at night when they were the last ones working. But this closeness was different. This was deliberate. This meant something. The drive to the Giordano estate passed in silence. Antonio stared out the window, watching Manhattan's lights slide across his sharp features. His phone buzzed repeatedly. He ignored it. Elena wanted to ask what he was thinking, why tonight mattered, why she was here. But 5 years had taught her when to speak and when to guard her silence. The Giordano estate rose before them like something from another era. A sprawling villa in Westchester that looked transported directly from Tuscany, complete with marble fountains and manicured gardens. Tonight, New York's most powerful Italian families would gather to celebrate the wedding of Vincenzo Giordano's daughter. Which meant tonight, every major player in the East Coast's organized crime network would be under one roof. They climbed the marble steps together, cameras flashing, and Elena felt the weight of curious stares. Antonio Salvatore rarely brought anyone to family events. By morning, every famiglia would be whispering about the mystery woman at Il Giudice's side. Inside, champagne flowed like water. Murano crystal chandeliers cast everything in warm, golden light. Elena recognized faces from surveillance photos, from wiretap transcripts, from the confidential files she managed. Politicians who'd taken Salvatore money. Judges who'd dismissed Salvatore cases. Lawyers who'd buried Salvatore evidence. All of them gathered in tuxedos and designer gowns, pretending this was just another society wedding. 3 years ago, at a similar gathering, a woman in Versace had asked Antonio if Elena was his girlfriend. He'd looked at the woman with the expression he usually wore right before destroying someone's entire operation and said, "Elena is worth far more than that. She's irreplaceable." The woman had smiled nervously and retreated. Elena had stood there feeling simultaneously elevated and dismissed, wondering what it meant to be irreplaceable to a man who treated people like chess pieces. But tonight, as Antonio guided her through the crowd, his hand possessive at the small of her back, Elena felt different. The way he stood closer than necessary. The way powerful men nodded to her with respect instead of looking through her. The way Antonio introduced her, not as my assistant, but simply as Elena. Maybe tonight she wasn't invisible anymore. The evening unfolded with the kind of civilized danger that defined this world. Antonio led Elena from one cluster of guests to another, introducing her to men whose names she knew from wiretaps and women whose jewelry could fund small countries. Elena played her role perfectly, charming but discreet, intelligent but modest. 5 years of watching Antonio navigate these treacherous social waters had taught her the dance. "This is Elena," Antonio said to a silver-haired man she recognized as a New York state senator. "She's the reason my empire doesn't crumble into chaos." The senator laughed and shook Elena's hand with practiced warmth. "Anyone who can keep Antonio Salvatore organized deserves a medal." Elena smiled just enough. "I don't organize him, Senator. I just make sure he doesn't miss the important meetings." Antonio glanced at her, and she caught a flicker in his dark eyes, something that might have been amusement. They moved through the reception, champagne offered at every turn. Elena never drank while working. And despite Antonio's words that tonight would be different, 5 years of survival instinct kept whispering, "Stay sharp." Then she saw him. Dante Moretti, tall and lean with salt and pepper hair, making his way through the crowd like a shark through dark water. Dante Moretti, head of the Moretti family, Antonio's primary rival, a man who'd been trying to expand into Salvatore territory for years. Elena had organized enough counter-strategies to know exactly how dangerous he was. Moretti approached with a smile that never reached his cold eyes. "Antonio, we need to discuss the Brooklyn situation. Privately." Antonio turned to Elena, and for the first time that night, she saw genuine hesitation in his face. "Will you be all right?" She forced a smile, even as something tightened in her chest at the thought of being alone among wolves. "I'll be fine. Go. It's important." Antonio studied her for another second, then nodded. 5 minutes. Then I'll find you." He walked away with Moretti toward a private room, and Elena stood alone beneath a crystal chandelier worth more than most people's houses, not knowing that those 5 minutes were about to change everything. Elena needed air. The room had become suffocating. Too many eyes, too many false smiles, too many people who smiled to your face while plotting your destruction. She found her way to the terrace, where November wind cut like knives. But she welcomed it, because the sharp cold on her bare shoulders was easier to bear than the suffocation inside. The Westchester Hills stretched before her, lights twinkling in the darkness like fallen stars. Beautiful and dangerous, exactly like the world she'd chosen to inhabit. The loyal dog finally got let off her leash. Elena spun around. Christian Nero leaned against the doorframe, champagne in hand, his smile sharp as broken glass. She knew him immediately, the attorney who represented the families that wanted to see Antonio's empire burn. Tall, conventionally handsome with slicked back hair and eyes like ice. Over 5 years she'd arranged 4 meetings with him, all tense, all ending in barely veiled threats. He'd been watching her all night, and something in his gaze had made her skin crawl. "Mr. Nero," Elena kept her voice professional, even as every instinct screamed danger. "Enjoying the wedding?" "More now than I was a moment ago." He moved closer, and Elena fought the urge to back away. 5 years following Salvatore around like a shadow. Ever wonder what it would be like to work for someone who actually sees you? Someone who treats you like more than a glorified secretary? "I'm Antonio's executive assistant." "You're his pet." Christian was too close now. Elena could smell expensive cologne and alcohol. "Everyone knows it. You book his meetings, manage his schedule, probably warm his bed when he needs stress relief. You're crossing a line." "Am I?" His hand shot out, fingers clamping around her wrist hard enough to hurt. Elena tried to wrench free, but his grip was iron. "I don't think so. Let go of me." Her voice came out harder than she felt. "Not yet." Christian pulled her closer, his breath hot against her face. "I've been watching you all night. Watching Salvatore parade you around like a trophy. But we both know what you really are, a filing cabinet in a pretty dress. A walking NDA. The boss's loyal little bitch." The word hit like a slap. Elena tried to rip her arm free, but he squeezed harder, hard enough to leave bruises. Let go. I'm not finished. Then, deliberately, Christian raised his voice loud enough that people on the terrace turned to stare. What's it like being Salvatore's whore? The word echoed across the terrace like a gunshot. Elena felt blood rush to her face as every eye locked onto her. Some faces showed entertainment. Others showed pity. Whispers spread like wildfire. That's right, Christian said louder, making sure everyone heard. Salvatore's loyal little whore. 5 years wagging her tail behind him. Tell me, Elena, does he pay you well enough for your services? The humiliation burned through her like acid. Elena could see the stares, the whispers, hands lifting to cover mouths as people laughed. And through the glass doors leading back into the reception hall, she saw him. Antonio. He stood just inside, having returned from his meeting with Moretti. His dark eyes were fixed directly on her, on Christian, on the hand clamped around her wrist. He'd seen everything, heard everything. And he didn't move. He didn't intervene. He didn't speak. His face was completely blank, his obsidian eyes revealing nothing. He simply stood there, motionless as a statue, while she was humiliated in front of New York's most powerful families. Elena's heart shattered. 5 years. 5 years of loyalty. 5 years of silence. 5 years of protecting his secrets, organizing his life, guarding his empire. And when she needed him most, he stood there and watched. Time seemed to stop. Elena looked at Antonio through the glass, and the world around her blurred. The laughter, the whispers, Christian's hand still clamped around her wrist, all of it faded. Only Antonio remained, standing motionless, dark eyes fixed on her without a flicker of emotion. She'd learned to read him. 5 years of studying every micro-expression, every gesture, every shift in tone. She knew when he was angry even when his face showed nothing. She knew when he was satisfied even when he never said it. She knew when he was calculating someone's destruction, even while smiling politely. But now, watching him stand there, Elena couldn't read anything. No anger, no protection, nothing but cold emptiness. He was watching her humiliation, hearing every insult, doing nothing. Not one step forward. Not one word to end it. Not even a warning look at Christian. Only silence. That lethal silence she'd once admired was now grinding her heart to dust. She remembered last night when he told her to come with him. Tonight will be different. Stay close to me. She thought it meant something. She'd let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, after 5 years she meant more to him than a convenient tool. How foolish. Christian was right. She was nothing but a walking file cabinet, an NDA in a designer dress. A loyal dog trotting behind her master. And when the dog got kicked, the master just watched. Tears burned in her eyes, but Elena swallowed them down. She would not cry here. Not in front of Christian. Not in front of these vultures. And certainly not in front of Antonio Salvatore. She'd cried enough in her life. At 21, when her mother died and she had to become everything to Marco. Late nights counting coins to see if there'd be enough for groceries. Moments when she thought she'd collapse under the weight of surviving. She'd survived all of it alone. She didn't need Antonio Salvatore to protect her. She'd only needed him to show her, just once, that she mattered. But he'd already given his answer. With his silence. With his stillness. With those cold, dead eyes watching her be trampled. She meant nothing. She never had. Elena yanked her arm hard out of Christian's grip. Pain flared where his fingers scraped her skin, but she didn't care. She only wanted to escape. "Excuse me," she said, her voice surprisingly calm despite breaking apart inside. "I need to leave." Christian opened his mouth to say something else, but Elena had already turned and walked away. She didn't run. Running would give them more to talk about. She moved with steady steps, head high, back straight, as if nothing had happened. As if her heart wasn't bleeding inside her chest. She crossed through the reception hall, feeling every gaze snap to her. The whispers followed like ghosts. That's her. Salvatore's assistant. Poor thing. Humiliated like that, and he didn't even defend her. Elena swallowed it all, buried it beneath the armor she'd built across 28 years of life. She grabbed her clutch from the coat check and headed for the doors. Luca appeared at her side immediately, his scarred face creased with concern. "Miss Elena, the boss. Tell Mr. Salvatore," she cut him off, her voice ice cold, "that my resignation will be on his desk Monday morning. The car is his. I'll take a taxi." She didn't wait for an answer. She pushed through the doors and stepped into the November night, cold air hitting her like a slap. Elena descended the marble steps, her heels clicking a steady rhythm against stone. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away from that place as fast as possible. 1 block, 2 blocks, 3 blocks. Her feet started to ache, the heels never meant for long walks. But she didn't stop. Physical pain was easier than the pain tearing her apart inside. At last she stopped at a street corner, breathing hard, legs trembling. Westchester stretched around her, indifferent to the hurt of one small woman standing alone on a sidewalk. She hailed a taxi. A yellow cab pulled over, and Elena practically fell into the back seat. "Brooklyn," she said, her address spilling out automatically. The driver nodded and asked nothing, and as the cab rolled forward, as the lights of the Giordano estate faded behind her, Elena finally allowed herself to break. Tears slid down her cheeks, hot and bitter. She cried in silence, shoulders shaking, hand clamped over her mouth so no sound could escape. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror but said nothing. Maybe he was used to women crying in taxis late at night in New York. 5 years. 5 years of giving everything. Her loyalty, her silence, sleepless nights, secrets that weighed like stones. And what had she received in return? A blank stare through glass. Silence when she needed words. Stillness when she needed protection. She remembered Antonio's eyes tonight when he told her to wear her hair down. She thought she saw something in those dark eyes, tenderness, maybe even affection. What a joke. She'd been deceiving herself for 5 years, seeing things that weren't there, hoping for what could never be. Antonio Salvatore wasn't capable of loving anyone. He was only capable of using people. And she'd let herself be used for far too long. When the taxi stopped in front of her apartment building in Brooklyn, Elena wiped her tears, paid the fare, and stepped out. Tonight would be the last time she cried over Antonio Salvatore. She swore it to herself. The apartment was freezing when Elena stepped inside at 2 in the morning. She didn't turn on lights. Just stood there in the dark, still wearing the emerald dress, feet aching from walking blocks in heels. She kicked the shoes off, heard them hit the wall with a sharp crack, then sank onto the sofa, the expensive dress crumpling around her. Her phone had been vibrating nonstop for the past 3 hours. Luca had called 9 times. Enzo, the head of security, had called 6. Even Antonio's mother, Alessandra Salvatore, had somehow gotten her number and called twice. But no calls from the one person she both wanted and feared to hear from. Antonio Salvatore didn't call. Of course he didn't. Why would he? She was just his assistant, an employee like any other, replaceable despite his claims to the contrary. Elena threw the phone aside and let it keep buzzing. She pulled out her laptop, the screen's glow harsh in the darkness, and started typing. The resignation letter came shockingly easily. 5 years of devotion reduced to cold, professional lines. After 5 years of dedicated service, I hereby resign from the position of executive assistant, effective immediately, pursuant to the terms of my employment contract. I understand that I am bound by a 30-day confidentiality transition period, during which I will be available for knowledge transfer. The confidentiality clause. She'd forgotten that buried in the 52-page contract she'd signed 5 years ago. 30 days where technically she still belonged to Antonio. Unable to take another job, unable to leave the city, required to be available for debriefing. 30 days of purgatory. She finished the letter, saved it, and closed the laptop. Sleep felt impossible, but exhaustion finally won, pulling her under into dreams filled with dark eyes and judging silence. She woke to pounding on the door. Sunlight spilled through the window, already past noon. Elena staggered to her feet, still in the wrinkled dress, mascara smeared down her face. She opened the door to find a courier holding a large package stamped with the Salvatore Corporation logo. Package for Elena Romano. She signed automatically and carried it inside. Inside was her resignation letter, printed and officially stamped. A thick binder titled Transition Procedures. And a small envelope with no name. Her hands shook as she opened it. A check. Not her final paycheck, that had already been deposited automatically. This was something else. A number that stole her breath. 6 months' salary plus a bonus equal to her entire first year's compensation. No note. No explanation. No, thank you for 5 years. No, I'm sorry for what happened. Only money. As if money could repair humiliation. As if money could erase his silence. Anger flared in Elena's chest, hot and sharp. She tore the check in half, then quarters, then eighths. The pieces fluttered to the floor like snow, and she stood there breathing hard, staring at them. Then she stopped. Marco. Her brother's final year at NYU was expensive. And while Elena had savings, this bonus would secure Marco's future without debt. It was money she'd earned with 5 years of her life. Throwing it away out of pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Slowly, Elena knelt and gathered the torn pieces. Her hands trembled as she found tape and carefully pieced each scrap back together. She hated herself for it. Hated the weakness. Hated that she still needed his money even after he'd treated her like nothing. But she had no choice. She never had. The girl from Brooklyn who'd worn second-hand clothes and counted pennies had learned long ago that self-respect was a luxury people like her couldn't afford. When the check was taped back together, crooked and scarred, Elena stared at it with dry eyes. She'd cried enough last night. She wouldn't cry again. She would take this money, pay Marco's tuition, and survive the next 30 days. Then she would disappear from Antonio Salvatore's life forever. But deep down, in a place she didn't want to acknowledge, a small part of her was still waiting. Waiting for a call. Waiting for an explanation. Waiting for anything that would prove the last 5 years hadn't been completely meaningless. Her phone stayed silent. Antonio Salvatore didn't call. Monday morning arrived cold and gray, typical November in New York. Elena put on her strictest suit, pulled her hair back into the familiar severe bun, and armored herself with professionalism. She looked in the mirror and saw a woman who looked tired, older, but harder. She needed that hardness. Salvatore Tower loomed before her as always, 52 stories of glass and steel thrusting into the sky. For 5 years she'd walked into this building every morning with a sense of belonging. Today she walked in like a stranger. Enzo waited in the lobby, his scarred face flickering with concern when he saw her. "Miss Elena, the boss is." "I know the procedure," she cut him off, voice colder than intended. 30 days of transition. "I'll comply." Enzo hesitated, then led her to the elevator. But instead of pressing 52 for Antonio's private office, he pressed 51. The conference room. Not the personal office. The message landed like a slap. Official, not personal. Distance established. Elena swallowed the bitterness and stepped out when the doors opened. Conference room A was cold, long glass table, black leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Antonio stood by the window, back to her, looking down at the city below. He didn't turn when she entered, but she knew he registered her presence. 5 years had taught her that. "Your resignation cited personal reasons," he said without emotion. "Do you want to clarify?" Elena sat in one of the chairs, maintaining distance. "I don't believe I'm required to explain." "You're not required." He turned then, and she saw dark shadows under his eyes she'd never noticed before. He looked tired, strained. She didn't let herself care. "I'm asking anyway." "For the record?" The bite in her voice surprised her. "To make sure I won't go work for a rival?" "Don't worry, Mr. Salvatore. I'm bound by enough NDAs to guarantee my silence until I'm dead." Antonio's jaw tightened, one of his tells she'd learned to read. "That's not why I'm asking." "Then why?" She tilted her head, looking straight into his dark eyes. "What do you want to hear? That I'm resigning because Christian Nero called me your whore in front of New York's elite? Or because you, the man I gave 5 years of my life to, stood there and did nothing?" Silence fell, heavy and sharp as a blade. Antonio didn't answer. He only looked at her with eyes she couldn't read. And that silence, so much like the silence at the wedding, set her anger on fire. 5 years? Her voice trembled slightly. 5 years I kept your secrets, organized your life, protected your interests. I know everything, Antonio. Every number, every name, every body. And you couldn't just once. Her voice broke. Just once defend me? Elena. I didn't need you to fight for me. She stood because she couldn't stay seated another second. I didn't need you to be a hero. I just needed you to show me I meant something. That the last 5 years weren't. She stopped, realizing she was revealing too much. Letting him see the wound she wanted to hide. Weren't what? His voice dropped lower. Elena drew a deep breath. It doesn't matter anymore. I'll complete the 30 days as required by contract. After that, you'll never have to see me again. She turned toward the door, but Antonio's voice stopped her. Christian Nero was found in his office Sunday morning. Elena froze, hand on the doorknob. She turned back slowly. What? Antonio didn't look at her. He stared out the window, dark eyes tracking the Manhattan skyline. His client list was leaked to every journalist in New York. His bank accounts frozen. And several cases he'd buried for 20 years are suddenly under investigation. By Sunday afternoon he'd lost everything. His career, his reputation, his future. Elena felt her legs go weak. Did you? I made 4 phone calls before midnight Saturday, Antonio said, voice as calm as if discussing the weather. By 1 a.m. the wheels were turning. By morning, Christian Nero was completely destroyed. She stared at him, trying to process it. Saturday night, while she'd walked blocks in heels, while she'd cried in the taxi, while she'd believed he didn't care, he'd made 4 phone calls and erased Christian Nero's career. Why? She whispered. Why didn't you say anything at the wedding? When Christian grabbed me, when he called me? She couldn't force herself to repeat the word. You just stood there. I stood there, Antonio agreed, finally turning to look at her, because Christian Nero was surrounded by witnesses, including 3 judges, 2 senators, and a federal prosecutor. Any physical intervention from me would have had consequences. Legal complications. Ammunition for my enemies. So I stood there. I watched. And I calculated exactly how to destroy him. Elena shook her head, emotions colliding in her chest. I didn't know. I thought you didn't care. I thought I was just replaceable. Something flashed in Antonio's dark eyes, anger, maybe pain. In 5 years, have I ever treated you as if you were replaceable? She opened her mouth to answer, but memory surged in. 20 months ago, when Marco had been in a car accident, she'd gotten the call in the middle of a tense meeting with the Calabrese family. She tried to stay composed, but Antonio had seen her face. He'd called a recess, sent her to the hospital in his car with Luca driving, and handled the meeting himself. When she tried to thank him later, he'd only said, "Family matters." 8 months ago, when her apartment building had a fire and she'd lost almost everything, she'd shown up at the office the next day in borrowed clothes, ready to work. Antonio had looked at her once and handed her keys to an apartment he owned. Temporary until you're settled. She was still living there. He'd never asked for rent. No, she whispered. No, you haven't. So why was Saturday night different? Antonio stepped closer. Why did you think I would abandon you the very moment you needed me most? Elena looked down at her hands, at the faint bruise on her wrist where Christian's fingers had gripped. It felt different. For the first time in 5 years, I wasn't your assistant. I was just a woman at a wedding. And you brought me there. Asked me to let my hair down. Said tonight would be different. And I thought. She stopped. You thought what? I thought maybe I meant something to you. Not as an employee. As. She shook her head. It was stupid. It wasn't stupid. His voice went low and dangerous. It was exactly right. Elena lifted her head, heart hammering. Antonio was right in front of her now, close enough that she could see every line in his severe, handsome face. He raised his hand and gently took her wrist, turning it to examine the bruise. His fingers traced the mark with unexpected tenderness. This is why I destroyed him, he said quietly. Not because he embarrassed my assistant. Because he dared to put his hands on you. Because he dared to make you feel small. Because he dared to touch what belongs to me. I don't belong to you, Elena said, but her voice trembled, lacking conviction. Don't you? His obsidian eyes held hers, and for the first time in 5 years, Elena saw something beneath the cold mask. Something raw. Something terrifying. 5 years, Elena. You know everything about my empire. You know my mother's favorite flowers. You know which exits I prefer in every building. You know exactly how I take my espresso at 3 a.m. when we work late. You've saved my life, protected my interests, kept my secrets. He tilted his head. If you don't belong to me, then what are you? Elena didn't get the chance to answer. Her phone rang, slicing through the charged moment. A known number. She meant to ignore it, but instinct, 5 years of honed survival instinct, made her pick up. Elena Romano. The voice on the other end was smooth, cultured, unfamiliar. Miss Romano. I believe it's time we met. This is Dante Moretti. The name turned her blood to ice. Dante Moretti. Antonio's primary rival. The head of the Moretti family that had been trying to expand into Salvatore territory for years. Elena had organized enough counter-strategies to know exactly how dangerous he was. I have nothing to say to you. On the contrary. You have 5 years of valuable information about Antonio Salvatore's operations. Information the right buyer would pay generously for. Antonio moved close enough to hear, his face locking into that familiar cold mask, his eyes darkening like storm clouds. I don't want your money, Elena said, forcing her voice steady. I think you do. A beep, a message. Elena lowered the phone and looked at the screen. The world fell away. A photograph. Marco, her brother, smiling with friends outside NYU's campus, completely unaware. Sunlight caught in his dark hair, his young face bright with easy joy. The attached message was simple and cruel. Your brother is a handsome kid. Would be a shame if something happened to him. 2 p.m. today, Café Luciano. Come alone, or I'll send someone to collect you in a way that won't be pleasant. Elena couldn't breathe. She stared at the photo, at Marco's careless smile, and felt primal fear invade every cell. Marco knew nothing about Elena's real work. Marco thought she was just an ordinary assistant to a wealthy businessman. Marco wasn't supposed to be dragged into this dark world. Elena. Antonio's voice, sharp as a knife, pulled her from panic. She handed him the phone, hands shaking. Antonio looked at the picture and the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Elena had seen him angry before but never like this. Not hot, explosive rage. Something colder. More dangerous. The frozen fury of a man ready to burn the world down. He pulled out his own phone and dialed. Enzo. Dante Moretti just contacted Elena. Full protection detail on her, immediately. Yes, right now. Another call. Luca. There's a kid named Marco Romano, final year at NYU. Send people to pick him up and take him somewhere safe until I've handled this. Elena listened to him issue orders, and part of her wanted to object, to insist she could handle this herself. But she wasn't stupid. She knew who Dante Moretti was. She knew what he could do. And alone she didn't stand a chance. Antonio, she said when he hung up, her voice thin with fear. Marco doesn't know anything. He's innocent. I know. Antonio turned to her, and for the first time since they'd met 5 years ago, she saw something that looked like softness in those dark eyes. That's why I'll make sure nothing happens to him. You don't have to. Don't argue. Not about this. He stepped close and placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. Dante Moretti thinks you're vulnerable because you resigned. He thinks you're alone. He doesn't understand you've never been alone. Not while you're still mine. Antonio. You can say whatever you want, Elena. But Dante Moretti just threatened your brother. That means he declared war on me. 2 hours later, they left Manhattan. Luca drove through quiet roads heading north toward the Hudson Valley. Elena sat in the back beside Antonio, silent, watching the city lights fade behind them. She'd called Marco, trying to keep her voice steady while telling him to follow every instruction from the people who came for him. Marco had panicked, had 1,000 questions, but eventually agreed. Enzo had taken him to another safe location. Far from anyone who might find him. The place we're going, Antonio finally said after nearly an hour of silence. No one in the organization knows the address except me, Luca, and now you. Elena turned to look at him in the darkness. Not even your mother? Not even my mother. They drove another hour, leaving the city behind, pushing deeper into the forested hills north of the city. Finally, the car turned onto a private road, through a gate that opened automatically, and stopped in front of a house Elena could only describe as a fortress. Modern, isolated, with security cameras covering every angle. But it didn't look like a safe house. It looked like a home. This is one of my private shelters, Antonio said as they went inside. The interior was warm despite the modern architecture. Paintings on the walls, comfortable furniture, a kitchen fully stocked. Felt lived in. Do you come here often? Elena asked, surprised by how different it felt from the cold image Antonio projected. When I need to disappear. He set his bag down and turned to her. There are 3 bedrooms upstairs. Choose whichever you want. Luca will be in the guest house outside. Before Elena could answer, Antonio's phone rang. He listened in silence, his face darkening with every passing second. When he hung up, his obsidian eyes met hers with grim intensity. My team checked your apartment. They found 3 cameras. 1 in the living room, 1 in the bedroom, 1 in the bathroom. Elena felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. Her bedroom. Her bathroom. Someone had watched her in the most private moments of her life. The violation made her want to be sick. How long? She asked, voice trembling. Based on the equipment, at least 6 months. Military grade, encrypted. And here's the worst part. They were masked using Salvatore Corporation's own security protocols. Dante used access codes that only someone inside my organization could have provided. A mole, Elena whispered. Someone told Dante the moment you resigned. Someone gave him real-time information. Someone set you up perfectly. Antonio's jaw tightened. And when I find out who, they'll pray for a quick death. Elena sank onto the sofa trying to process it all. This morning she thought her biggest problem was surviving 30 days of transition. Now her brother was in hiding, her apartment had been wired with cameras, and one of New York's most dangerous crime bosses wanted her as an informant. Dante approached me within hours of my resignation, she said slowly, mind working through the shock. That means someone on the inside told him immediately. Someone close enough to know the exact moment I was vulnerable. Antonio nodded, expression dark. Which is why we're here. Until I find the leak, you're not safe anywhere else. Elena's phone buzzed, a message from Enzo confirming Marco was secure. She let out a small breath of relief, but fear still sat heavy in her chest. Marco will be fine, Antonio said, reading her thoughts. I made sure of it. Why? She looked up at him. Why are you doing all this for me? I resigned. I'm not your employee anymore. Antonio was silent for a long time, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made breathing difficult. Because you were never only my employee, he finally said. And that's the problem, Elena. That's always been the problem. Night settled over the Hudson Valley in silence. Elena stood by the window overlooking dark forest, moonlight filtering through the trees. She'd showered and changed into clothes someone had left in the room, but sleep felt impossible. Too much had happened. Too much still hung unspoken between them. She heard Antonio's footsteps before she saw him. He appeared beside her with 2 glasses of wine, handed her one without a word. They stood in silence, looking out at the dark forest, and Elena realized it was the first time in 5 years they'd been truly alone together without work standing between them. You should take Dante's offer, Antonio said abruptly, voice tight. Immunity, protection, money. You could walk away from all this and start over. Elena turned to him, not believing what she'd heard. Are you telling me to betray you? I'm telling you to protect yourself. He still wouldn't look at her. My world is dangerous. You saw that tonight. Dante won't stop. If it's not Dante, it'll be someone else. There's always someone else. Do you want me to leave? Her voice trembled. I want you safe. Finally, he looked at her, and in the moonlight, Elena saw something she'd never seen on Antonio Salvatore's face. Torment. Pain. Fear, not for himself but for her. I want you to have a normal life. A job that doesn't require knowing escape routes. A relationship that doesn't put you in danger. I want you. He stopped, swallowed hard. I want you happy. Even if that means leaving me. What if I don't want to leave? Antonio closed his eyes as if her question physically hurt him. Don't say things you can't take back. I don't want to take it back. Elena set her wine down and turned to face him fully. 5 years, Antonio. 5 years of standing behind you, convincing myself what I felt was only professional respect. That my heart racing whenever you looked at me was just work stress. That thinking about you every night before sleep was just habit. She took a deep breath. I love you. I've probably loved you since the first day when you said I'd do, and I knew it was insane and dangerous and would probably destroy me. But it's the truth. It's always been the truth. Silence fell, so heavy she could hear her own heartbeat. Antonio looked at her as if she'd spoken in a language he didn't understand. Then he set his glass down and stepped close enough that she could feel his heat. 5 years, he said quietly. 5 years of maintaining distance, keeping boundaries, telling myself you were an employee and there were lines I couldn't cross. But every night we worked late and you leaned over the desk to show me something, I had to restrain myself from pulling you closer. Every time you let your hair down in those rare moments, I imagined what it would be like to run my fingers through it. His hand rose and cupped her face with a gentleness that startled her. His thumb brushed her cheek. You're everything that truly matters to me. In this world of power and violence and enemies, you're the only thing that makes me want to wake up each morning. And that scares me more than any enemy ever could. Don't be afraid anymore, Elena whispered. She placed her hand on his chest, felt his heart pounding beneath expensive fabric. Stop keeping your distance. Stop being so controlled. Claim what's yours. His dark eyes went nearly black with desire and something deeper. If I claim you, I'll never let go. Never. Do you understand that? Once you're mine, there's no going back. I don't want to go back. Antonio kissed her. Not gently, not hesitantly, but like 5 years of restraint exploding into flame. Hungry and possessive, yet tender enough to ache. His hand slid into her hair, pulled her tight against him as if afraid she'd disappear. And Elena kissed him back with everything she'd hidden for 5 years. Love, longing, fear braided with hope. She tasted wine on his mouth, felt the strength in his arms, and for the first time in her life, felt like she belonged somewhere. To someone. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Antonio rested his forehead against hers. Tomorrow we deal with Dante, he whispered. But tonight you're mine. I've always been yours, Elena answered. I just needed you to stop being so controlled and admit it. Antonio laughed, low and warm, the most beautiful sound Elena had ever heard. And in the safe house in the Hudson Valley, with moonlight spilling through the windows, they finally stopped pretending. The next morning came too quickly. Elena woke to sunlight and the warmth of Antonio beside her, his arms still wrapped around her waist as if even in sleep, he couldn't let go. Last night hadn't been a dream. It had all really happened. But daylight brought reality. Dante Moretti was still out there. Marco was still in hiding. And the 2 p.m. meeting was still waiting. Elena slipped out of bed, got dressed and went downstairs. She made espresso the way Antonio liked it, strong, no sugar whether it was 3 a.m. or not. Then she sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper and started planning. When Antonio appeared 20 minutes later, hair still damp from the shower, he found her drawing a diagram with fierce concentration. He paused in the doorway watching her, then crossed the room and kissed her forehead before sitting across from her. "What are you doing?" "Planning." She slid the espresso toward him. "Dante wants to meet me at 2. I'm going." Antonio froze halfway to lifting the cup. "No. Listen." She lifted her face, dark eyes meeting his with the determination she'd built all night. "Dante thinks I'm the weak link. He thinks I'm angry and betrayed and ready to sell you out for revenge. We can use that. That means sending you into danger." "It means feeding him false information," Elena interrupted. "I'll play the part of a wounded assistant who wants revenge on the boss who let her be publicly humiliated. I'll sell him details about routes, schedules, officials on your payroll. All of it fabricated, prepared in advance." Antonio studied her diagram in silence. She could see his strategic mind working, evaluating, searching for weaknesses. Dante's not stupid. He'll verify the information. "Exactly. That's why we give him enough truth to make the lies believable." Elena leaned forward. "The negotiation with Moretti at the wedding, I can say it happened, a fact Dante can confirm. But I'll lie about what it meant. Make him believe you're expanding south when you're really consolidating north. When Dante acts on that information, he'll expose his flank. And we'll be waiting," Antonio finished, his eyes lighting with familiar calculation. Elena nodded. "If there's a mole in your organization, this is how we draw them out. Dante knows too much too fast. Someone's feeding him information. If we control what I tell Dante, we can track how it spreads and find the leak." Silence stretched. Antonio looked at her, not at the plan but at her. "You thought about this all night?" "While I slept." "I did." She reached across the table and laid her hand over his. "Dante threatened Marco. Put cameras in my bedroom. Thinks I'm weak and exploitable. I want to prove him wrong. I want him to pay." Something dangerous flickered in Antonio's eyes, pride mixed with worry. "Your plan requires you to walk into enemy territory alone." "I won't be alone." She squeezed his hand. "You'll be there. Not visible but there. Luca inside the cafe. Enzo watching from across the street. I'll wear a wire. Everything Dante says will be captured." Antonio turned his hand and clasped hers. "If anything goes wrong, anything, you say the word contract, and we pull you out immediately." "Contract." "Understood." "I'm serious, Elena. This isn't a game. Dante Moretti has killed for less than what you're proposing. If he suspects you're working with me..." "He won't suspect," Elena cut in, "because I'll give him exactly what he expects. A woman hurt and furious, eager to get back at the man who stood there and did nothing while she was humiliated. I'll talk about Christian Nero, about your silence. I'll make him believe I hate you. You don't hate me." "No. But I know what that betrayal felt like when I believed it was real. All I have to do is remember Saturday night and perform it again." She gave him a small smile. "Don't worry. I'm a good actress. 5 years of pretending I didn't love you gave me plenty of practice." Antonio watched her for a long moment, then exhaled, a sound of surrender she rarely heard from him. "You're crazy, brave, and terrifying when you want to be." He lifted her hand and kissed her fingers. "We'll do it your way. But we prepare every detail. There's no room for mistakes." Elena nodded, heart racing with fear tangled with resolve. She was about to walk into the wolf's den. But this time she wasn't prey. She was the trap. 2 hours later, Elena sat across from Dante Moretti in Café Luciano, wearing last season's clothes and a performance worthy of an Oscar. She fed him lies wrapped in enough truth to sound convincing, played the wounded assistant perfectly, and watched him believe every word. Within 3 days, Dante acted on her false information. He moved his operations south, exposing his northern flank exactly as Antonio predicted. And when Antonio's people moved in, they dismantled Dante's empire piece by piece. The mole inside Antonio's organization revealed himself trying to warn Dante, a junior enforcer who'd been selling information for 6 months. Antonio handled him personally. Elena didn't ask for details. Dante Moretti was arrested 2 weeks later on federal RICO charges. The evidence, gathered partially from Elena's wire, was overwhelming. He wouldn't see freedom for the rest of his life. Marco returned to NYU, safe and oblivious to how close he'd come to danger. Elena told him there'd been a security threat at her job, now resolved. He accepted it and went back to his life. And Elena? She never completed the 30-day transition period. Antonio ripped up her resignation letter and offered her a new title, consigliera, his most trusted advisor, his equal. The Salvatore family had never had a female consigliera. They accepted it because Antonio made it clear they had no choice. And because after what Elena did to Dante Moretti, only a fool would underestimate her. 6 months later, on a terrace overlooking the Manhattan skyline, Antonio Salvatore got down on one knee and offered Elena Romano a ring that had belonged to his Sicilian grandmother. "I told you I'd ask when you fully understood what accepting would mean," he said, dark eyes holding hers. "You've seen my world. You've survived it. You've conquered it. Now I'm asking, will you rule it with me?" Elena looked at the man who'd destroyed enemies to protect her, the man who'd given her power in a world that rarely gave women anything, the man she'd loved for 5 years from the shadows. "Yes," she said simply. "I will." They married 3 months later in a private ceremony attended only by family. Marco walked her down the aisle, proud and oblivious to the real nature of the empire his sister now helped lead. And on their wedding night, as Antonio held her close in the same Hudson Valley safe house where they'd first admitted the truth, he whispered against her hair. "5 years ago you walked into my office looking for a job. You found an empire instead." "No," Elena corrected, tilting her face to look into those dark, dangerous eyes she loved. "I found something better. I found where I belong." In the world of organized crime, love is the deadliest weakness. But Elena Romano and Antonio Salvatore proved it could also be the strongest armor. Because together they were unstoppable. If this story touched your heart, please like and share it with someone who loves intense, emotional romance. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next captivating story. Tell us in the comments, have you ever loved someone the world said was wrong for you? We'd love to hear your story. Until next time, may you find the courage to claim what's yours, no matter how dangerous the world around you. Goodbye and see you in the next video.